Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John with the Evolved Caveman podcast, and it is Sunday morning, so I'm in my Sunday finest from Jazz Fest in New Orleans. And I wanted to tell you about the summit that Jory Rose, my partner, and I have just put on. It started May 11th. It goes through about June 10th. And you can sign up for it free through June 10th and get access to all the past speakers. Each interview is available for 30 days for free. And one of the best interviews that I've done so far together we've done about 30 interviews, 28. And the content is absolutely incredible. So if you're interested, go to www.survivingtothriving.site. Survivingtothriving.site, S-I-T-E. And you can sign up there for free. It just requires a name and email. So I wanted to share one of the interviews from that summit with you today on the podcast. And it is with Dr. Dan Tomasulo, who recently wrote the book, Learned Hopefulness, The Power of Positivity to Overcome Depression. And it is awesome. The book is awesome. The interview is awesome. A little bit about Dan, teacher. He's a professor at Columbia University, holds a PhD in psychology, master's in applied positive psychology. He's been hailed as one of the top 10 online influencers on the topic of depression. And let me just read you a couple paragraphs from this book, because this part blew me away. So psychology has shifted from focusing on the past to crafting the future. And in the 1960s, Martin Seligman theorized that feeling helpless and giving up in one situation creates feelings of helplessness in other situations, causing symptoms of depression. Initially, he and Steve Meyer researched how animals failed to escape shock after it was induced by uncontrollable aversive events. The term learned helplessness came from these studies. This term is huge in psychology. So it came from these studies and was eventually extended to how the real or perceived inability to control the outcome of circumstance based on past learning was the cause of passivity. In the 60s, the understanding and technology didn't allow for investigating the nuanced elements of how the brain functioned. So it was thought that depression was the result of learned helplessness. Seligman's research and theory have been the dominant view of depression in psychology until now. In their 50-year follow-up, the same researchers proved their initial theory was wrong. Once they were able to use all the developments in brain science and biochemistry, they discovered that, quote, passivity in response to shock is not learned. It is the default unlearned response to prolonged aversive events, which in turn inhibits or stops escape. This deeper understanding has us looking forward to gain control, not backward to unlearn what happened. They go on to say, we speculate that it is expectations of a better future that most matter in treatment. That is freaking huge. That means instead of going backwards to try and figure out what we did wrong or what we learned improperly, we need to be looking ahead to the future, to what can go right. We need to learn to be hopeful. And this applies to things like abusive relationships, shitty marriages, even addictions. There's a lot in those couple paragraphs. So here's the hour-long interview, 45 minutes, with Dan Tomasulo. Take a listen. It's one of the best interviews I've done in about 70 interviews so far. Thank you so much. Remember, check out survivingtothriving.site. And this is Dr. John at the Evolved Caveman podcast. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody, this is Dr. John, and I am back with the latest interview on Surviving to Thriving, where you learn to grow through adversity. And I am extremely honored to have with me today Dan Tomasulo. And Dan has been honored by ShareCare as one of the top 10 online influencers on the issue of depression. He's a core faculty member of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute, and that's at Columbia, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And he holds a PhD in psychology, a master's in writing, a master's of applied positive psychology from UPenn. He authors the daily column Ask the Therapist for PsychCentral.com and developed the Dare to Be Happy experiential workshops for Kripalu. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
His award-winning memoir, American Snake Pit, which I have to check out, was released in 2018. And his next book, which I'm really excited for, and the reason that he's here, is Learned Hopefulness, The Power of Positivity to Overcome Depression, which has been hailed as the perfect recipe for fulfillment, joy, peace, and expansion of awareness by Deepak Chopra. And Martin Seligman also said, Martin Seligman is one of my heroes, this is the best go-to book on how to use hope to relieve your depression. So Dan, thank you so much for coming aboard. I really appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this series you're having.
Well, thank you. So tell me a little bit about how did you get into the topic of hope? Because it's kind of nebulous.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was about maybe 10 years ago. I went through a really rough time myself, and there is nothing worse than a depressed psychologist, That's really
ring a little untrue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not, because, I was in supervision and therapy for myself, but I listened to other people tell me what's happening for them. And I think, you got it bad. Wait till I didn't actually say that.
Well, but if I can jump in there, because I had that same experience, and I think as humans, we do get depressed at times. I mean, I went through a really bad divorce, and I was, supporting people that were going through a divorce.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, not an interruption, because I think that's the deal. I think sometimes the new things that come about happen because we're trying to heal something inside of us, and when we find something that works, it's very exciting to want to share that. And so a friend of mine was a budding positive psychologist at the time, and he dragged me to the first International Positive Psychology Association conference where Marty Seligman was there, and I was like, I really don't want to be around 2,000 positive psychologists. I'm miserable. I'd like to stay miserable. I don't want to get better, And then I went, and the truth is I had been not in a good place for a few months, and I was kind of surprised. I've been a psychologist a long time, and I knew a lot of the tricks that were out there, and nothing was working to kind of pull me out of this. I was really kind of in a rut. But when I went to this conference, I got to hear the research, and I was originally a researcher, and I was like, oh my goodness, if half of this is true, we're on the dawn of something really exciting and dynamic. And
Can I stop you there for a second? Because
sure.
One of the things, being at UC Berkeley for my PhD, like it was drilled into me that everything has to be based on research. And I've got that strong analytical researcher part of my mind. And I think there's something really compelling about the research behind positive psychology. Like that was something I needed for me to believe it. Like I'd gotten some of the humanistic psychology back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but I didn't really get into it because there was no research behind it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been the big transition. Self-help books have been around for a long time, but evidence-based self-help books, I think, are the new thing, where we want to see at least a foundation, and not that all the research has to be perfectly aligned. One of the things I found in writing the book, Learned Hopefulness, was that a lot of the researchers don't read one another. There were medical researchers, experimental psychology, social psychology. And so everybody was a little bit in their own silo. But when I got to this International Positive Psychology Association, I was floored by what was going on. And I felt I had missed that. I was not in that space of trying to learn it. So I just made a decision I would try to learn as much as I could. And I really didn't think much about it. I applied to, I already had a PhD and MFA. I had, a bunch of other graduate degrees. So I wasn't really that overwhelmed. I think, well, I'll just go get this thing and whatever. But when I got there, I realized, oh my goodness, they had only, I was the first licensed psychologist and experiential therapist they had let into the program.
Wow.
They were looking for psychologists to come in. They were trying to bring it to yoga teachers and business people and coaches and all like that.
Can I pause you there again, Dan? Because one of the things I've had this kind of discussion with Jory, my co-host for this, and I'm always excited about positive psychology. I think it's like manna from heaven, personally. But I think to market it to lay people, she's like, I don't know about positive psychology. I don't know that people will get it. So just from a layperson's perspective, I mean, psychology for 100 years has focused on what's wrong with us, how we're broken, how do we fix that, like depression or ADHD or anxiety or PTSD or whatever it is. Positive psychology is focused on how we're right, what are our strengths, what are our passions, what are our positive emotions, why should we care about positive emotions, what do they do for us? Would you say that captures it, or what am I missing there?
No, you're not missing anything. I think the way that I've described it is not being depressed isn't the same as being happy.
Yeah.
We have a lot of tools about how not to be depressed, but the truth is 80% of people with depression relapse. And some new research just last year said that if you've relapsed 3 times, the chances of relapse are 100%. So that means every single tool we've developed in psychology, all the medicine, if you put it all together, we have an 80% failure rate. That's pretty wild. And that was one of the things when I, pitched the publisher. I was like, nothing is working, except we started to ask a different question. What are those 20% doing that keep them from being depressed? And those studies were unbelievably cool because it showed that if you could focus on positive emotions and you could focus on well-being, now you've got a scale that tips in the direction of positivity. First, you get balanced, and then it tips it like that. I've likened that to what we were talking about earlier before the broadcast about pebbles and feathers, that negative thoughts are like pebbles and positive thoughts are like feathers. Because of evolution, we have something called the negativity bias, which means that we're more drawn to the negative. You know, if you see a woman helping an elderly man across the street, you'll notice it. But if there's a guy screaming at a cop because he just got a parking ticket, that's going to hijack your brain. And you're going to look at that because we worry. We're all warriors by design because that's what helped us survive. So the negative thoughts are like those pebbles. They're pretty heavy. And the question is, can the feathers outweigh that? And the answer is yes, but you need a lot of them.
Yeah, I love the idea of, kind of filling up the positive bucket and the negative bucket of emotions. And that negative bucket gets filled up really quickly. And one of the things I teach is how to dump out that bucket of negative, but also how to fill up that bucket of positive, because the more you practice doing that, the more it becomes second nature. And I also like the thought that, the negative emotions or the uncomfortable emotions kind of scream at us. They yell, they're loud, they really get our attention. Whereas the positive emotions are more fleeting, fragile, they whisper, they're quiet. Yeah. And so I think, part of it is training ourselves to notice, to be aware of those very subtle and quick positive emotions.
Yeah. And to savor them and replay them. Yeah. The thing that got me so interested. So, I went back to school and, learned all that. But then I was invited to a lecture that Marty and Steve Mayer had. And this was about a concept known as learned hopelessness. And it was back in the 60s and 70s that they had these series of experiments where they showed that if dogs were shocked in one area and they couldn't get away, and they put them in another paradigm, another like escape thing where the floor got shocked and it was easy for them to get away, they didn't do anything. They became passive. And so this idea was that they had learned helplessness. Yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's, that's made sense for so many years. But when they brought this new research out, they said, we got it completely wrong. It doesn't work like that at all. What we found out now, because in the 60s and 70s, they didn't have the fMRIs and what happens in the brain and whatever. Now we know that when you're exposed to a chronic aversive stimulus, your brain will shut down. Just like my laptop here. If it overheats, it'll shut down to preserve itself. And we're built the same way.
That totally explains my ex-wife.
There we go.
Wait, what?
Now we got it. It was an evolutionary response, John. I'm sorry,
exactly that was so inappropriate, but funny.
It was funny. I like that very much.
Chronic aversive stimulus. Yeah, okay.
Right, So it's like evolution is saying to us, don't waste your energy. Don't push yourself because nothing's going to change.
So that's not really learned, is what you're saying.
Exactly. I mean, that's the big point here.
Because I have a lot of parents talking to me about, oh, my teenage son, he's got learned helplessness. He just sits in bed all day.
Mm-mm. No, and that was the thing. Once there's this loop in the brain between something called the dorsal raphe nucleus and the prefrontal ventromedial nucleus.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. There's a little switch actually that happens, and this switch gets kicked on if things are chronically aversive. Just literally like what happens with our laptops.
And so when that switch clicks on, then what happens?
We become passive. So passivity is basically a response to something that we can't control. And so we're not learning anything. We're just shutting down. The reason why that's so important is because it's not about the past that'll get us out of that space. It's about the future. Because a lot of people don't know, but in the original studies, there were 1/3 of the dogs who had gotten shocked.
Can you say that again about the past and the future? Because that's super important.
Oh, it's everything.
It's a big deal. So would you say it again?
Sure. That if something, so I'll give you an example. If I go across the street and I get hit by a car, right, and I get hit by a green car and I break my leg, I go to the hospital. I'm in there a few weeks. They fix me up. I come out and I come back to that same street. I might indeed be looking for cars. I might be looking for a green car. I might be looking for anything green that could hurt me. But the truth of the matter is the thing that's going to move me forward, that's going to get me across the street, is doing a risk assessment of that moment. It's not about the past. I might have some concerns, but those concerns really don't measure into my thinking about, are there cars coming now? Can I get across the street in the time that I have? Can I make it to the other side? So the brain shifts into this risk assessment in the future. So it's what they call detect and expect. If I can detect that it's okay, I'll expect I can do it. So really, we're talking about your belief system. And that's the thing. I remember I was at this lecture, and the name of this thing in the brain is called the hope circuit that they discovered, right? Well, I was like on fire. I couldn't wait to get out of the room to go write the book. I was like, I got to go do this, because it was so profound, because for 50 years, everybody's been following learned helplessness. And the truth of the matter is you're not unlearning anything. You have to learn how to move into the future.
Yeah, it is huge, because learned helplessness was such a pivotal, seminal belief and thought in psychology. So that's kind of been flipped on its head.
And it's been flipped on its head by the two people who discovered it. That's the thing that I love about Marty and Steve. They fell on their own sword, because they said, no, the science doesn't support that now.
Yeah, you got to love that.
Right?
Okay, so boy, I mean, there's so many ways to go here, Dan.
Yeah.
So let's go to the heart of the matter, I guess, although this was pretty meaty. What is hope? Because, we were talking earlier about Rick Snyder, and you were saying Rick was sort of more decision, more cognitive, and you're saying there's more of an emotional piece to this.
Yeah. So I'll give you, let me do this. Let me give you kind of a quick answer for it, but then pack it with a couple of things that I think are kind of cool. First of all, hope is the only positive emotion that requires negativity or uncertainty to be activated. So if you look at all the positive emotions, you look like things at joy or bliss or interest or any of those, they don't need a jump start. But there's no need for hope if you're certain, right? And there's no negativity, right? There's no need for it. Makes sense. You need uncertainty or negativity in order to have hope be activated. So
right now is the perfect time.
Those are the two most ubiquitous feelings in the world right now. Yeah. Right? We have uncertainty and negativity. So people don't know what's coming. And when they do start to anticipate it, the good news is pretty far out there. The things that are mostly in front of us are negative things. It is the perfect recipe for activating hope. The real work is on having a transformational way of looking at this, because if you have a transformational understanding, what I mean by that is, well, the Buddha said it, right? No mud, no lotus. How do you extract from the difficulties a way of looking forward and changing your belief system? And that's where this gets really kind of intriguing and dynamic, because hope. Now back to answer the question more directly, right? Hope is our belief that we can control something in the future. And that's what makes it different from faith, as an example. We use hope and faith interchangeably, but they're really very different things. When I talk about hope now, it's I hope about something in the future that I think I can control. But we use the term like faith. Faith is when we've surrendered to something else controlling the future. Hope is when we have control. I don't know if you remember, but Catfish Hunter was this great baseball player.
I'm an A's
right?
fan.
And so what happened is when he went into the Hall of Fame, they had these interviews, and he talked about everything he did to work out, to throw the baseball, and how he practiced off-season, on-season, all this stuff. And he was saying he practiced in different weather and different climates and different conditions, all this kind of stuff. And then he says, I do all this work, but at some point, I have to let go of the ball. And then I don't have any control. And I thought, what a perfect metaphor. That's the difference between hope and faith. What is it that we can control and believe we can control and have some influence in the future? And then where do we let go of that? Well, we have to kind of release that impact or influence in the future. So those are the
other metaphor that I really like that's similar to that is, remember the U.S. or the Olympic sport of curling?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
You're on ice and they push this really heavy stone on the ice. But one of the reasons I like that as the metaphor is there's a lot of skill and effort and strength that go into pushing the stone and the perfect release and the perfect spin. But the release is very gentle.
Yes. Yeah.
No violence to it at all, right? So it's just, I don't know. No,
it's perfect. I had a chance. It was really interesting. St. Patrick's Cathedral here in New York invited me to speak on the difference between hope and faith. I couldn't believe it. It was really so cool to come into this very, very holy place. And what was interesting is I think we're moving into an arena now where faith is faith, and we have to have that. But there was a quote I found where they said, hope is faith holding its hand out in the dark. And I used that to start that presentation, because it's really that there's an overlap between the two, but it's our belief of what we can control that hope gets focused on.
So it sounds to me like hope also has this goal-oriented component to it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that's really been interesting. When I was reading the different theories and research, like Snyder's work, and there's Barbara Fredrickson's work, and there's Kate Hurd, when I was reading their work, I realized they didn't spend a lot of time looking at one another's work, just different timelines, different reasons. Well, because the medical people really focus on the medical stuff.
Okay.
The experimental psychologists were focusing more on.
Oh, gotcha.
They were kind of in their own domains. So one of the things that happened is, as I started reading and taking a deep dive into the literature, I said, because originally I was thinking, well, I'll just try to critique each one and say this is wrong, that is wrong, or whatever. But then I realized, wait a minute. What if they're all right? What if it's like the three blind men holding the elephant? One grabs the ear and says, oh, it looks like a bird. And one grabs the leg and says, it looks like a tree. And the other one grabs the tail and says, it looks like a rope.
And pardon me, I have to add this because there's the classic element by Sam Gross that it was in, I think, the New York Times. And there's another guy that's feeling the elephant's BM. And he's like, an elephant is soft and squishy. Again, totally inappropriate, but funny.
Now I've got that image in my head, Sean. You see, I was doing just fine talking about hope. Now I'm going to, the rest of the day.
I've damaged you forever. I am so
I think
sorry.
my weekend is ruined.
But
now.
I have hope that you will recover.
That's true. Now I have to think which of the scientists I would put on that, because I have an image of all the different theories holding hope. Now I gotta add that one. I'm gonna get my artist to draw that.
Yeah, add the one that's the most off base.
That's right. Yeah, who's off there? So that idea, I do now have that image. Now that idea was like, oh, okay, if they were all right, what would hope really look like? And much more importantly, where is the intersection? And one of the big things that came actually from the medical literature was this idea of goals and calibration. Because you see, like Snyder's work, when he was talking about goals and pathways and agency, which are, setting a goal, having multiple ways to get there, and the motivation to do that, right?
And the belief that you can get there, yeah.
Exactly. And in the medical community, they were saying one of the things that happens when you're in a medical condition that, in particular, that's deteriorating, that the thing that's going to help you feel better is adjusting your goals so that the goals get calibrated. So this concept of calibration started to fit into the theory in a really powerful way, because it means if I want to feel good about something and motivated and get my arms around it and enthusiastic, but I had the goal up here, I can't quite get enough tread. So I started bringing it down, so it feels closer. I mean, kind of an example. If I think I can run an 8-minute mile, and I run an 8-minute and 30-second mile, I could feel terrible about that, or I could readjust the goal. Well, now I want to run an 8:25. So you bring it close, and that's where you catch some real tread.
Well, and you had a phrase that I really liked. It spoke to me, the idea of micro goals.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's really powerful, because one of the things I talk about with clients is the same idea of making the goals, like breaking them down into smaller and smaller bits until you get to a point where you're like, yeah, I could do that. Like I could do that in probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
I'm doing a lot of consultations these days for first responders, physicians, businesses, and we talk a lot about micro goals, because it might sound almost ludicrous to be talking about something in 15, 20-minute segments. But the truth of the matter is, if I'm engaged in doing something and I know it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end in 20 minutes, what starts to happen is these micro goals get very close to my sense of agency, my sense of connection. So something like making dinner or making a sandwich, it seems small, but when I do it with intention and a deliberate nature, a couple of things happen that really are fascinating about hope and what I call transformational coping is that if I'm chopping carrots to make a soup, right? I'm chopping the carrots, and I'm in the moment when I'm doing them. And the truth is, that's the best prophylactic against the past and the future. Well, I'm going to be protected, right?
You're in the zone.
I'm in the zone, absolutely.
And also, I'm always telling my clients that the present moment is the most pleasant, least painful place to be.
Yeah. You
train your mind to be there with yourself, doing whatever you're doing, taking a shower, driving the car. The better off you are.
And the thing about that I like the most is a new piece of research that talks about proactive coping, because if I'm in this moment getting the carrots ready for the soup, I'm also thinking about getting the water on, the other vegetables. I'm just slightly in the future. And what that does is it not only keeps me here, but it keeps me engaged with the next right thing to be doing. So micro goals and setting this proactive coping is the kind of thing where you go into a type of flow, a type of engagement.
Yeah, the zone, flow.
The zone, absolutely.
So,
Right.
tell me more. I mean, like, what does the model look like? Because I've got like Snyder's model, where, and I kind of put values in front of that because I think your values drive your goals, which then you can find pathways to achieve those goals. And
Sure.
then agency or the belief that you can get there, the motivation to get there.
Right, right. Well, the overall model is something I call the hierarchy of hope. So if you can imagine like one of those pyramids, I guess like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but if you imagine something like that, at the base of it, you need to have uncertainty and negativity in order for the whole system to get activated. And then the very next thing that happens is you look for resources immediately. Like, in other words, if I get walloped with something that I wasn't expecting, the first strategy, if I'm going into what's called a high hope situation where I want to move through this, I start thinking about what resources can I bring to bear. Then the very next thing is...
So like resources like toilet paper.
Yeah. Well, yes. See, now I got that to think about.
What resources were you thinking about? Strength, courage, ethics, all this high pollutant stuff.
How was the interview with John?
Bring
it down. Well, all right. How about I do this? I'll give you a good example. I'm going to take it out of the bathroom for a second.
Okay. Oh man.
But I'm going to go to. You drive it along and you get a flat tire. Right? So here it is. It's perfect. You have uncertainty and negativity. You're trying to get from point A to point B, you get a flat tire. What's the first thing that you're going to do if you think about how hope works? First thing you're going to think of, do I have a spare and do I have a jack? These are things that you start asking about. What are my immediate resources? What do I got with? Do I have my cell phone? Do I have a flashlight if it's at night? What are the resources that are available? Then the very next thing, if it's natural and it's organic and you facilitate it, you start thinking about support. Who can I call? All right, there's a gas station I know a half a mile from here. Let's see if they're open and if somebody can come out and get me. I have AAA. Maybe it's time to give them a call. Should I call the police? In other words, you start thinking about, okay, this has happened. What's the assessment of that? What's the resources for it? Then how do I get some support for it? And then some really interesting things happen because this is the part where the book focuses on a lot, which is you got to shift your perception. You were going to be at your destination in 10 minutes. That's not going to happen now. So you've got to shift your perception of what's possible, what's doable. So you start, the way the brain works is that the people with high hope, they start shifting their perception right away. So we can learn how to do that. You start thinking about possibilities. You start thinking about, well, what are my strengths? Oh, my brother-in-law works at the gas station over here. I know he'll come get me. AAA said it'll take 2 hours. You start thinking about, okay, I got to shift my perception here. And the minute you do this, it's the equivalent of getting like a critical mass, because it's like, okay, I can't have the goal that I wanted, right? I have to shift my goal. So once you shift your perception, you start recalibrating. Okay, I can get this done in an hour. Now I got to call those people, tell them I'm going to be late, fix this, fix that. The recalibration part kind of gets you back on track about being motivated and connected. Then this is the part then where Snyder's work on hope fit in. I think what he discovered was the tip of the iceberg, because now it's very, very cognitive. Now it's sort of like I have my agency, what's my motivation? Okay, now I'm going to be an hour late, but I'll be safe, right? What are the pathways? Well, what I can do is have somebody else start the meeting. What can I do to get that goal done? That meeting's essential. What am I going to do for it? So I think his contribution was giving us some beautiful insight into the principle. And then I think there's something on top of that. And the top of that is what high hope people are and what they do. They come into the world where they're like ready. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And if I get walloped by something, I'm not going to get knocked down. I'm going to find a way around it. There's I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called Morita therapy. It's Japanese psychotherapy, and all of their metaphors for how to live life are based on water, right? So they have this great thing about how you should live your life. And they talk about a stream, and there's a rock in the stream. Well, the stream doesn't freak out when it sees the rock. It doesn't go, oh, no, I was going in that direction, and now there's the rock. What am I? It doesn't do that at all. And that's what high hope people do. They're in this stream of life. And if something is there, they don't see it as an obstacle or an adversity. They start to interpret it as a challenge or an opportunity.
Can I break in there? Because I got all sorts of questions and things going on. So, I mean, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is one of my heroes growing up, Bruce Lee.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
When he asked to describe his fighting style, I think he said something like, be like water.
Yeah. Be like water.
Flow,
be
right?
like water.
But
That's right.
So you mentioned that there's more emotion in your model. Where is the emotion in that?
Sure. Great question. A way to understand it is that it's packed into the perspective, the shift in perspective.
Because it gives you, or it results in...
the big shift is from feeling stuck to looking at possibilities. And there's a great researcher, Barbara Fredrickson, who has talked about what's called an upward spiral, right? Yep. She has a broaden and build perspective. So basically what that means, if we come back to the pebbles and feathers thing, it's sort of like once you start with positive emotion, it seems to draw other positive emotions. The difference is it's not quite as strong as what we would see with a negative emotion pulling on other negative emotions. So part of it is as you start anticipating possibilities, you want to start nurturing this idea of a positive emotion, starting to see what I call the low-hanging fruit in positive psychology, things like kindness and gratitude. It's sort of like, okay, here are things that are readily available. And I have this thing called the 21-Day Hope Challenge where there are 7 interventions about the past, 7 about the present, and 7 about the future, so that people start to learn if you're going to shift from being stuck and feeling like you have a fixed mindset, you want to develop a transformational mindset so that you can have a growth mindset. And the transformational mindset is learning how to ask questions like, all right, what's possible here? And most importantly, how can I start engaging in positive emotions to tip that scale by tossing more feathers on it?
It's fascinating, and thank you for sharing the model. It's beautiful. I love it. And one of the things that really smacks me in the face is this idea of cognitive rigidity versus cognitive flexibility. One of the things I've seen in this pandemic is the people that are really struggling with this are the people that have a high degree of cognitive rigidity. They can't change their agenda. They can't change the lens. They can't change the perspective. And so they're fighting the circumstances, which creates a lot of anxiety and depression. So how do you see that kind of figuring into that? I mean, it seems to be that perspective shift or the ability to shift the perspective.
Sure. I mean, a way to think about that, and that's brilliant, by the way. I love the way that you frame that, because the rigidity, it's overwhelming, right? Because if you don't have mental agility to start looking at possibilities, even if the situation is quite limited, there might be 99% of the things that are out of our control. But if you can take a look at the thing, well, what can I control in this time period that I have? If you can't make that kind of transformation, you'll be really stuck by really literally being frozen. Your brain will freeze up. By the way, just to make the whole loop, right? And then I'll come back to this agility thing. But that loop that I talked about, the hope circuit, the part of the brain that gets turned on or shut off is the part of the brain that has to do with fight or flight. So it's really that level of survival. So when we get super rigid and super negative in our thinking, what's happened is we're really afraid. That's why we don't look around anymore. We don't try to get our resources. We don't build resources. We stay super focused. And so part of this is, as we move to the next level, is to think about what do we need to become spontaneous, like carefully planned spontaneity.
Okay,
right?
wait. So my mind's going all over the place again. So it seems to me that a lot of what I'm working with clients is, a lot of my clients have that sympathetic nervous system stuck in the on position, that fight, go, do. Like, I got to make more money. I'm going. And I'm trying to teach them to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yes. Right.
It's like, okay, bring your heart rate down, breathe, relax. Because the stress response is supposed to go on, off, on, off, on, off.
Right.
It strikes me that hope might be one of the key crossover points.
Absolutely. You got it. That's it exactly.
No, okay, so if hope is the belief that we can control something in the future, it strikes me that maybe that belief is a decision that could be made like that.
Yes.
That's a cognitive option. It's a choice. Like, okay, I can choose to believe that I can make that micro goal. I can get there. That
good, right?
Goal, and it strikes me similar to mindsets or core beliefs that you can change. Just it's a decision.
Yeah. Back again, where 60s, 70s, there was this concept of behavior modification. Well, I think we're in the age now of belief modification.
Yes.
That might.
I love you.
Yeah. Well, right. This I think is coming. I think it's all coming. That our beliefs are really nothing much fancier than habits of thought. Right. And the habits of thought, like everything else, need to be challenged. And a lot of things, I'll just tell you one of the things that I found work really well with patient students and, people who are interested in this is there's something called positive deviance. Probably not the way you're thinking about it, but.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, well, yeah.
All right, yeah. So positive deviance would be something like this. Somebody will come to me and they'll say, I'm not creative. I can't think of anything new to do. I'm kind of stuck in this rut. Blah 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 blah. Okay, and then I'll say, but you told me the other day that you did a Skype call with your niece and you made up a song just to entertain her. And they go, oh, yeah, I guess I did. But that doesn't mean I'm creative. Okay. But then you start finding these very small things because people have, when you get into this narrow thing, the brain goes into this sort of black and white thinking. Yeah. And it's very hard to recognize that there are these other areas that are there. So part of it is not just challenging somebody's thinking like this, but to put them in conflict with themselves, because that's where the real belief modification starts to happen. A lot of people have the Rene Descartes, he said, they thought he said, I think, therefore I am. Well, that's not exactly what he said. And really? In fact, no. They only took part of it during the translation. What he actually said, if you look up the actual translation, he said, I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am.
Interesting.
Now, that's fascinating to me because it means once we come into contradiction with our own way of thinking, that's what makes us alive. So when people are really stuck, giving them an opportunity to look at their own behavior, their own thought system, their own history of well-being, right? Where they think, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do the other thing. And you show them an angle of their life that is there, you're not making it up, but they haven't looked at, all of a sudden they go into this doubt about, is my belief true? The minute they have that kind of doubt, something emerges in that because, not to get too zen about the whole thing, but now there's a self that emerges that can hold the two conflicting pieces of information.
Yeah, I love that. And Dan, I got to thank you, because I've been mockingly at war with Descartes for about 30 years, raging at I think, therefore I am. Like, he screwed me. Like, I was in my head for years.
Yeah.
You got to get into your body, right? You got to pay attention to your body if you want to tell what you're feeling, because emotions are embodied. And I thought for many years.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of pride.
Blame the translator.
As most men do. So, I could talk to you forever. I'm trying to kind of get to the most important questions. How do we strengthen hope?
Yeah, great. Again, great question. A way to think about this is that there's a series of decisions that we make, that high hope people make, and if you make them on the side of seeing possibilities, choosing to seek out positive emotions, using your strengths. If you do those kinds of decisions, make those kinds of choices, you'll move toward a high hope situation. It's when you make decisions that allow you to remain stuck that the problems emerge. So let me just identify that principle, because that's a strong one. A decision not to change is a decision to remain the same. So it puts the emphasis right where it needs to be, that when people are stuck in a loop, they're actually making a decision to stay stuck. And that, the truth is, if you just say that off the top of your head, a lot of people get upset with that. But the viability of that is that we can't have it any other way, because otherwise you're a victim of your thoughts, and you're not. Your thoughts are like the front wheels of a car. You set them this way, that's the way you're going to go. William James was the one who said it first, right? Yeah. He said, "My experience is what I agree to attend to. If I attend to the positive things, that's what my experience is going to be. If I ruminate about the negative, that's what my experience is going to be." And something I've been studying very recently has been about ambivalence. What happens when you put the front wheels of the car in different directions? Well, you don't go anywhere, if you just stay in that spot.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's basically it. But these are the decisions, and the thing that fuels the hope is making the decision to look for possibilities, that focus on your strength, to cherish relationships, to have purpose and meaning in your life. It's some real work in making those decisions, but there were 7 of them that kind of identify that process.
Yeah, I like the idea of it's the second voice that is the most powerful, because I kind of think of this is my mind, and this is me kind of looking down at my mind going, oh, there's that thought again of I'm an idiot.
Yeah, right.
I can choose how to react or respond to that thought. I can engage in it and look for evidence to support it, or I can just let it go. And so the second thought is the one that says, well, that's not true. I have a PhD. I wrote a book, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there was a few steps that you went through about strengthening hope. One was, what am I feeling? Mm-hmm. What am I feeling and why?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Dispositional mindfulness.
Yeah. Sure. And, there's a lot now. I mean, mindfulness meditation is all over the place, and which I think is extraordinary. Yeah. However, in the Western world, we've sort of taken the original intent of mindfulness, and we've packaged it in a different way. And nothing against all the beautiful work by Jon Kabat-Zinn and the researchers and stuff, but Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, really set things straight when he said the miracle of mindfulness. The original intent was to try and be mindful as often as you can be. When you have a sitting practice, you're basically giving yourself time to become as mindful as you can in that moment of practice, but you're supposed to be trying to do that all the time. Right. So there's a lovely I don't know what you'd call it, I guess an offshoot now, where the researchers are starting to study this thing called dispositional mindfulness. And for all practical purposes, it's that pause for thought. Mm-hmm. When you go, what am I feeling? What's happening? What's going on? And the reason why that's so important is there's a lovely piece of research that shows that just doing that, nothing more, just asking yourself what's going on, the two most powerful character strengths of hope and grit emerge. And so you have to ask yourself the question, why would the brain do that? Why would the mind do that? Well, the second you stop and ask yourself, what's happening here? You've engaged in a form of self-regulation, emotional self-regulation, to just ask the question. Forget about the answer. The answer could be anything. It could be, I'm scattered now one way. But the pause for thought is where the power is. So once you train yourself to not just be, unless you're in the zone. If you're in the zone, then forget about it. But if it's just kind of like tumbling along, you asking where I'm at changes everything, because it gives you that initial boost of self-regulation.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to share. Thank you so much. That was awesome. So in wrapping up, is there anything, two things, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have? And then where can we get a hold of you? Where can we find the book? And I think you might have a free gift.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for asking all that. There's a couple of things. If you have your cell phone, you can text hopeful to 44222.
Repeat that.
Sure, it's hopeful to 44222. So just text the word hopeful to 44222. It'll give you an opt-in thing, and then you'll get the chapter and a bunch of other resources on hope. Or you can go to my website, which is just dantomasulo.com, and same thing. You can sign up there, and you'll get the free chapter and other resources. I'm just excited to share it, because I think this is the time for people to learn how to activate their own empowerment toward more hope in their life.
Yeah. And Dan, if I pause and ask myself, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling great gratitude and excitement, because this was amazing. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was a blast. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. And thank you for all the stuff that you're doing. I think this series is going to be fantastic.
Thank you so much. And that's it for this episode of Surviving to Thriving. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.